All right, hey there. Welcome to the Education of Weaponized Man podcast. This week's question: do you know when not to act?
This podcast exists for one reason: clarity. Clarity about violence, clarity about responsibility, and clarity about what it actually means to be prepared. This is not a show about fighting. It's not about aggression, dominance, or even just tactics. It's about judgment under pressure, restraint when force is justified, and responsibility for consequences of action and inaction. My name is Greg LeBoeuf, and I have spent over 3 decades working with men who face violence professionally and men who face it unexpectedly in ordinary lives. But I'm also a father and a husband, and like many of you, I've watched the world change faster than most people are willing to admit. This podcast isn't here to scare you, but it's also not here to reassure you. It's here to help you think clearly about situations that do not allow time for thinking. If you're looking for shortcuts, hype, or entertainment, this is probably not for you. But if you believe preparation is a responsibility, not an obsession, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
Okay, so listen, strength is often associated with action, but in serious situations, one of the hardest things a man can do is hold the line between action and restraint. So this episode is all going to be about restraint under pressure. Okay, so I think the instinct to dominate or to retaliate is something that becomes very powerful inside of a man when that pressure of a potentially life and death situation shows up. And so I kind of want to break down and give a framework for people to understand. Obviously, I think why restraint is important is somewhat self-explanatory, but we'll dive into that a little bit. But also then how. Okay, so the number one question that I would love your guys' input on is, why do you believe that pressure often drives unnecessary escalation?
I think that this is um, something like there's lots of ways I think we could come at this. For me, I really go into like the personal self when we are being attacked. Um, we believe it's personal. When I don't really think that it is, but most people believe that this is a personal attack. They are attacking Brad because of who he is or where he is or something like that. And when people are in a state where they're being attacked like that and they feel that pressure of those incoming arrows, and whether that's just verbal or um, physical, it's easy to have the ego that's attached to me on a personal level show up. And if the ego shows up when it's a moment of crisis, then it's like I could even the self talk that came in my head, even if I was thinking the ego coming in, was like, "What the fuck you think you're doing that to me for?" Do you know what I mean? It gets defensive and it gets like, "Fuck you!" Like I'm gonna show you then if you think that you're gonna do that to me. So on a personal level, if that's who's showing up under that pressure, is it's very easy for that to escalate because now your decision making is going to break down because you're making decisions based off of the personal self, um, and you're going to take actions that I don't think are going to serve you. And then that's when you fall into where we go into with the questions like, well, when not to act? It's very hard to do sometimes if you're emotionally fueled and invested into whatever is in front of you.
Okay, yeah, Dustin.
Yeah, I agree with Brad. I think everything he said is 100% right. I had a lot of similar ideas. Another thing I thought about was just the idea of like when I read this question, I'm like, okay, well, obviously, at least in my mind, I'm kind of looking at this from an untrained person's perspective in the sense that, why does pressure cause, overreaction? And I'm like, well, obviously, if you had someone who's very high level trained, ideally that's not happening. So kind of coming from that untrained thought side of things, I'm like, yeah, why would that happen? And I guess for me, like one thing that came to mind is I just started thinking about, just an untrained person's visceral reaction is going to be a little bit more of an innate reaction, talking about like SNS essentially. So kind of getting into the idea of like people will fall back to just like a more of the fight or flight model, which we all know is deeper than that. But to really keep it super simple, survival, or evolution has sort of set us up to survive by giving us the inherent, sympathetic nervous system superpowers, as we've talked about previous podcasts. And the idea there is to try and survive. So I'm like, okay, if you're untrained and you have all these things happen, it's like, if you don't know what to do, you're not trained, you don't have a survivable motor program. I'm like, you kind of just got to go with your default settings. Do you know what I mean? And so I think the default settings are to lean into just sort of those more raw capabilities, which are, because they're untrained, you're just going to try to rely heavily on strength and speed and power and all these things, and ultimately just lead to like an overreaction because it's not controlled. There's no control on the dial. It's like, I think why a lot of new people will come in and say, oh, I just go black, right? I just black out. I go crazy. Well, why? Like, why would you do that? Well, because your sympathetic nervous system does somewhat allow you to. It does sort of give you some of the capability to do that. So I think people may tend to want to lean into it, if that makes sense, just because they have nothing else, right?
Okay, let's circle back to the personal side of it, which is going to get explained more as we go through it. But the concept that like if somebody attacks you or your family, how do you not take it personally? You know what I mean? Because like the three types of crisis, right? You have the natural, you have the mechanical, and then you have the human crisis. And what's the difference between all three of those? Is the human crisis is the most traumatic for one reason, because it's personal. Because somebody decided to choose you. Whether they know you or not, they made a decision to choose you as their target, and you are so debased and dehumanized to the point that they're willing to take your life or the life of people that you love for over nothing. And maybe more personal because they don't know you. Right. So, Brad, you talked about this whole thing of being sucked into this personal response, which you're 100% correct. We're going to elaborate more on that after. So I guess the question is, and maybe we can get an answer for it now and then we'll go deeper on it after, but how do you not take it personal?
I think it's a reframe on violence, right? So, how I think about it, how do I think about it in terms of not being personal is violence has one objective, and that's to destroy. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who is on the receiving end of that. Violence doesn't care, right? The person wielding violence is just the person wielding violence. And when you look at it in terms of like understanding that its ultimate goal is destruction of you, your family, your neighbor, your community, your friends, your mother, it's like, well, then when you have it on that grand scale, I'm like, well, it's not personal. It's just what it does, and it's just the path of destruction that it tries to lead, and you're in the path. And, like when you think about that and then you attach that to, well, violence has, we have blueprints. There's a stimulus in front of you. And if you understand those stimuluses, if you understand the threats that are in front of you, then you could operate according to that, because those are not personal. And what I mean by that is like those aren't different, right? There's a baseline of stimulus that people go through when they're using violence, and that's a very global thing, and it's not unique to the individual, I don't believe. So when they apply that, is like that could be walking down the street, that could be a home invasion. I think the default settings for violence and the blueprints for violence are, there's not a lot of them. So, those stimuluses are universal, and you understand those. And that's why I think that we could go and say that it's not personal in terms of violence itself. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I get it. I just know that, when you have somebody that when they target you, it becomes personal. Like you can say violence is about destruction, and that could be, lots of people are facing violence all over the world. But when somebody kicks in your front door, or somebody accosts you on the street, or when somebody goes to harm your child in that moment, it's going to feel very personal because it's you. It's not the person, it's not the guy across the street who's not helping. It's not the 10 people recording you who are willing to do nothing, who, whatever it is, it's you. So how do we, you've already said a lot of what, and you started to really allude to the full answer. So I know you know this already, but it's this thing of just this first part of it is why pressure often drives unnecessary escalation is I think is because it is very personal and you have a reaction to that, to somebody threatening you, your life, like the feelings, the energy, the intent. It is very, very personal. And it's just, that's
So
what makes it so traumatic. Right. And it's like, so just for people that are listening to this, it's like, it's very easy to do unnecessary escalations. Very easy for that to happen. Restraint is not the top of anyone's priority list, typically. Cowardice can be. People can freeze, people can fail to do stuff, but restraint is not there typically. And I think it is because it is personal, is why it happens.
yeah, and I think that, you know, obviously I understand personal versus
Mm-hmm.
professional self, and that's where I now to bring that into the equation
Mm-hmm.
is I don't want my personal self to show up.
Yeah,
My
no,
personal self is not going to be the best solution
that's right.
for my family
Mm-hmm.
because you're right. Like let's say that okay, I feel that someone is trying to rape my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm gonna have a personal reaction to that.
Yep.
In terms of violence, that's violence. Violence is fucking septic and toxic that way.
Mm-hmm.
But for me to show up with the emotions of that situation fueling my actions and my responses, sorry, not responses, reactions to that,
Yep.
because that's exactly what they would be,
Mm-hmm.
does not serve my daughter, does not serve my
Mm-hmm.
wife or my family in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who is professional that understands the situation that's there, and knows how to regulate their response. When I have that person show up, I'm not going to end up in jail after the fact because I've done something that I should not do because there's no longer a threat present. That person is
Yeah.
going to stop my family from losing me after the fact.
So see, there's the gap though. There's the Grand Canyon. Because to intellectually say that, say, well, I don't want my personal self to show up, when you just use the example of somebody raping your daughter, most people listening to this right now already had a visceral reaction to that right now. People are already like, I got a shovel and a shotgun. You know what I mean? And like somebody does that to my daughter, like, you know what I mean? People are not even in this situation. Just hearing somebody say that, they're already having a visceral emotional reaction to that. Now they're going into that imagination and rehearsed response of what they think they would do, and some might actually carry that out. But like you just said, okay, there's massive consequences to that. And a lot of people would then say, I don't care. There's a lot of men that would even shut down even listening at this point because they go, I already know what I do. Show up and find out. Like try that, try it, and what finds out what happens. One of the hardest things to go is that listen, everybody says that, but the reality is that most don't do that, and most can't do that. They're not capable of it. What we're trying to offer is a better way. It's a way to be able to protect, right? A way to genuinely protect yourself and your family, to be able to handle that type of situation, to whatever is required to handle that situation, to end that threat, as is our right to end that threat. It is the difference between the personal self and the professional self. So now the question is, okay, well, how do you know when to not act? That's
Yeah.
that's what we need to uncover in this. So let's just actually
I
push
think
this to the second question. Or Dustin, throw in your point, and then we're going to push this thing. So because you're right, Brad, we're going to unpack. Then we're going to unpack how, like, because we're going to make sure we outline how you go from personal to professional. That's the whole point of this episode. So Dustin, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say like that's where it just shows the importance of the work on the front end. Do you know what I mean? Like this is where it goes
Yep.
beyond a physical motor program
Yeah.
and getting into like, well, what's your mental armor? What's your mental training been? How many times have you had these conversations in training and had someone explain to you all the costs of letting your personal self show up in that situation? Because you're 100% right. Brad said it. I didn't expect it. I had an emotional response to that.
Of course, yeah.
Like just that quick visceral, like, yeah, like how do you not? If you have a daughter, you had a response. The
Yep.
question is, what do you do next? Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but if you've spent time, and I'm saying, not even saying it's easy, but if you spent time like literally going through, okay, I do that. Personal self shows up to that exact scenario Brad just said. If you haven't done the work on the front end of like, well, okay, my personal self comes, what does that cost my daughter? You know what I mean? Maybe the situation still ends. Sure, it would. But what's the aftermath? Now my daughter's lost me for the rest of her life because I went too far. I'm in jail, yada, 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 fill in all the blanks. But it's like, but you have to do all that work ahead of time. You have to understand the importance of the repercussions of your actions, because that's the only way you can prevent it in the moment, is if you've got all that work done ahead of time.
Yeah. And just to be crystal clear too, like everyone, you're going to have, it's going to be personal to you. If we're just carrying on with that analogy or that scenario that everyone's running in their head right now, you're going to, we can all feel what that feels like. We can all feel the personal side of ourselves bubbling up right now. Like it's right there. Some people went instantaneously to boil. Some people went to like, the water was percolating. For every man that has a daughter, and probably a lot of men that don't even have daughters, they felt that. And so the trick is not to suppress that. But the trick is to not let that you can't Hulk out in that moment. You can have the professional self activate, and the personal self does not need to be suppressed and repressed and scolded and berated, like it's a useless untrained stray dog. It is fuel, right? That passion and that intent to protect is fuel, but it needs to be able to be integrated into a framework of the professional self. And let's be very even clearer. In the moment of, if that action was happening, there's a physical response is going to be needed and required and justified. But there's more to it. What you just alluded to, Dustin, there is aftermath. There are still lines. There are still things that are going to have to be dealt with that are going to have a continued impact on your child and your family beyond just the visceral response of what happens in that moment, which is why it's the word restraint is not a bad word. And I think if a lot of people in that context hear the word a father talking about restraint, when somebody's trying to do X to your daughter, you're misunderstanding the word restraint. The word restraint is not a weakness word. It is not a submission word, right? It's not. And that's what we want to try. That's what we're going to break down a little bit more. So let me just push to the second one, because we're going to be able to come full circle. Okay. So the second question then is, what is the psychological challenge of holding restraint under stress? That's exactly what I just talked about. What is the challenge of holding restraint under stress?
Yeah, I think obviously we, like you said, we just dipped into that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought about this, and I thought about myself, because obviously we all face it. We just did in that moment, just had a little glimpse of like what that feels like to have a kind of even an imagined pressure and then the visceral reaction to it. And when I was thinking about it for myself, I'm like, where's a really good example of ultimate restraint under pressure? And the thing that hit me is like, I have a ton of respect for tactical teams. And when I think about a tactical team breaching a room, I'm like, what do you always see? What do you always hear anytime that's happening? First guy in the room, he turns right, he gets a pie. He gets a little piece of that room. That's his zone. He does not step outside that zone. He doesn't look outside that zone. He doesn't fire outside that zone. And it's like, man, you want to talk about restraint under pressure? You're the first guy in a room of who knows what, and you're not allowed to like look, turn, or shoot left when you feel like that might be the only thing that keeps you alive. I'm like, to me, that's just like such a phenomenal amount of restraint. And then you kind of go, okay, well, like, how is that possible? How does that number one guy achieve that? And it's like, well, obviously through the training. And again, all that pre-incident, like training, planning, understanding. It's understanding that there's survivable value in having that kind of restraint. Because if you had like the same 8 tactical guys, instead of being stacked up, coming in and taking their piece of the pie, if they all just picked a window and a door at random and they all came in at the same time and they're all just spray and pray in every direction, like how's that turning out? Yeah. Like they're killing each other, right? So if you intellectually understand that, it's like, then you can start to put some legs under that table and start to convince yourself that like, no, this is how I stay alive, even if it goes against maybe my natural instincts. And I think that same thing applies to any situation we might find ourselves in, where if you understand ahead of time what this might cost you if you don't, show some restraint under pressure, then it's easier to do so, right?
Yeah. I'll jump in real quick because I just want to get to what Brad was talking about because he's already starting to lay the framework of going from the personal self to the professional self. But I think the easiest way to think of this is Brad talked about like if any of us face a situation where our child is being assaulted, you're going to have a personal response to that. Then Brad talked about how he goes, well, I understand that if that's the only, if my response is governed solely by the personal reactions to what is happening, it's probably going to be in some ways and on some levels justified, and in a lot of ways on a lot of levels probably unjustified. Like there's probably not going to be any real restraint there. Okay? But there might be a moment where restraint is not necessary. But then there is going to be potentially a moment, a fraction of a second later, or whatever that happens to be, where restraint is not only going to be necessary, it's going to be required. And if you fail to bring the restraint in that moment, you're now harming yourself and your child, your family, like you're harming everybody, like you're harming it, like it's doing more damage than good potentially. Okay. So I think the psychological challenge of holding on to restraint under stress can only actually be done if the personal self is not the only filter that you have built. And let me just say this real quick because I think you guys will agree with this and you can speak to it. I actually believe that the personal self has to actually be built a bit. You have to work on your personal self because I believe that, again, it can't be, you can't just go, I will have no personal response. We're not robots. We're emotional creatures. And I think that, so how you work on that is by building these other filters. So I thought of it this way. You have to have built a different filter. And when you're in the middle of a situation, the information that's being pulled in, often imperfect information, happening at a rate of speed that is beyond the speed of judgment. All of these different things, that information, as best you can in those moments, those fractions of seconds, are being run through multiple filters. If you have this personal side where you see this attack on your child, the personal self is going to supply this fuel to go, no, like just quite simply, no. Like this threat is going to stop against my child. I'm going to protect. But there also has to have been built a legal filter. There has to have been built an environmental filter. There has to have been built a psychological filter. There has to have been built all of these. There's different filters that have been built. And this information is not being processed through the personal filter only. And this is what Brad was talking about like, no, like if you understand violence, violence is about destruction. Violence is just a tool. There's these things, but like, I think the challenge is when you hear someone who has built multiple filters, as we've been doing over the years, it can seem like, oh, you're a robot. Like, I don't feel anything. Violence is just violence and I just this and the pre-incident indicators and the blueprints of violence and this and this and this. We can talk about it in a way that either sounds like you just technobabble or sounds like just like you're talking about it from an emotionless standpoint. And then people go, oh, that's the professional self. Like you're just this John Rambo that suppresses everything and I don't feel anything and all this type of stuff. That's not it at all. But you could see, I because I knew where this conversation was going, I could see it in Brad where when he talked about it and talked about, someone's attacking my daughter, you can feel the personal response in it. And then you could all of a sudden see him gain a different level of control because he's talking about like, well, there's the blueprints of violence and this, because there's this different understanding. But I think that these things, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but as you build out these other filters, let's just use the legal understanding. When there's a threat of imminent grievous bodily harm or death, there is no requirement of restraint. The second that that threat is no longer imminent or no longer poses grievous bodily harm, now restraint must be brought into that equation. And if you understand your legal rights, but not just understand them intellectually, like I read a book, but the legal is understood and has been trained and integrated and a filter built so that you recognize imminent threat, no restraint. No imminent threat, restraint. Like you can live that. That's information being processed through a filter very rapidly that is navigating you. And that is where the professional self has a diff, because it's this layer of filters. Does that kind of make sense? And it's like, because what is training?
Yep.
Like, what is training? Like, what have you been doing for 27 years? That's the power. Like, and I think that's the power. Like, I want people to understand that because that's real power. So one last point. I would be scared if alls I had was my personal reaction to like you tell me, like Brad said, imagine your daughter being assaulted. Like I can feel it. If that's all I had, if I had not built other filters, yeah, like, you know, both part of me would be like, fuck it. And the other part would be like, oh, fuck. Because you're not going to be there. You have no control. So go ahead, Brad. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that one thing I want to hone in on, and I think that when we talk about violence and we talk about restraint, it almost gets misconstrued of what we're actually talking about.
Yes, it does, 100%.
So like what you said about imminent bodily harm or death, you know, like if that's what we're facing, then there's no restraint.
That's right.
And then if that's not what we're facing, if the threat is no longer meeting those requirements, then it requires restraint.
Yes.
But the professional self is the one that is able to flip that switch. Mm-hmm. Now, if there is imminent grievously bodily harm or death, that does not mean that we cannot use the tool of violence in that moment. Like that, like let's be honest, like we talk about it all the time. Like violence is a tool and we can wield that tool. Mm-hmm. And in those moments, it's like you wield that fucking tool because that's what's required. Mm-hmm. But again, when that's no longer a threat and that switch is now turned from, okay, this is no longer a threat, it does not warrant that same level of violence that was in front of, like that was received previously. And I think that switch is really hard to flip if all you're doing is from your personal self.
Well, think about it this way. The personal self, like I said, can be fuel, right? Yeah. I mean, people of men and women have run into burning buildings to save their children or to save a parent or, you know, whatever, like to save someone or something they love. Like you put them, like that's fuel. That love is like fuel. So you can't just be like, oh, the personal self is all bad. No, it's not. But the personal self, tell me what part of us, what part of our filter or what part of ourselves is okay with punishing. Like somebody attacks your daughter and defend, self-defense. Well, that's up to and including lethal force. You can take a life in preservation of a life that is facing imminent grievous bodily harm or death. If that threat is there and that threat is imminent and grievous, then you can up to and including lethal force. So there is no higher level of violence than lethal force. But then the second that is not imminent and it is no longer there, you want to punish the person for have even attempted to take something that you love or to treat you a certain way. So the personal self is like the personal self has within it where, you know, I imagine back where the lynch mob shows up at the county jail and demands that you hand over the prisoner. And whether you know, it's just the mob believes this person's guilty and they're going to string him up at the closest tree. And you get what I mean? And a lot of people right now can go, hey, there were some cases where maybe that was warranted. I'm just saying that in the world we live in, punishment is not within the rights of us as Canadian citizens.
Well, you said something about if all you had, like when you were thinking about the scenarios, like all you had was your personal self. You said something that I think was very powerful. I was like, I'd probably just be like, well, fuck it. Mm-hmm. And that's the personal self. Yeah, that's the personal self. When it thinks about raining down punishment on somebody, it's going to be, yeah, fuck it. Yeah. Fuck it. And that's who's going to show up in that moment. but you can't have that. That's detrimental to the aftermath when your family is going to need you the most, and now you can't be there for them because your personal self showed up and said, "Fuck it."
Yeah. No,
I think too, like I was just gonna say, we're talking about self-defense up to and including taking life when legally and morally justified. And I think a lot of times what people fail to realize is that when it's your personal self, it's easy to be like morally justified, 100%, without a shadow of a doubt.
yeah.
Okay, great, that's your morals. Nobody can tell you your own morals.
Yeah.
Like we have that there kind of for your own, not taking trauma pie and all the PTSD and all that stuff. But it's like, but your moral code does not equal legal code. So the personal self morally might be good to go. I have no problem with this action. Okay, but then your professional self has to be legally, I cannot do this. And it's so there's that battle, I think.
Yeah, well, and it is, and for a lot of people, they will sit here right now and say, if someone's attacking my daughter, I'll kill him, and I don't care. I'll spend the rest of my life in jail. And this maybe ties back to a podcast we did a couple weeks ago, where we talked about be careful what you ask for. Do you know what I mean? Like you might say, like I don't care, but your child's 7 years old, 6 years old, and you spend the next 30 years in prison. So that one guy that you murdered or that you killed, well, remember, killing would be part of self-defense. Murdering would be after the fact, punishment. But the point is that there's other predators in this world. They need you there to continue to protect them, to continue to provide for them, to continue to raise them. So, again, does that matter to you or doesn't it matter to you? Right? Like, to me, it matters. And so I want to be able to regulate that. And again, the feeling of like, if you're an imminent threat to my family or to myself, and I'm facing imminent grievous bodily harm, I have the right to defend myself. And that's there is no restraint to that. You have the right to defend yourself. If the threat is not imminent and the threat is not grievous bodily harm, then restraint is required. But this really becomes a conversation again of like, personal versus professional, but it's like, oftentimes people misread the level of threat or the intent of the threat. So when a threat is not imminent and it is not a threat of imminent grievous bodily harm or death, they feel like it is because they get emotionally pulled into a situation and they go right to punishment. Most men, when you're in a situation, this is why if you just start lipping a guy off or saying whatever, they have these reactions and they will act before they think. And they will cross very quickly into a realm of punishment and they will do something. There's a bottle in their hand, they'll grab a bat out of their car, they pull that knife out of their pocket, and next thing you know, and then you look back at it and right, well, not only was there no imminent threat of grievous bodily harm and death, and now you're facing, why is that? Because you didn't know when not to act. And I just, for simplicity, bring it back to, you had no other filter but the personal self. That was driving everything. And the personal self, especially because again, I believe the personal self does change. I believe, as we've gone through training, I have my personal reaction to a lot of different things is way different now than before I trained. And you might just say, I'm in better control of my temper. I'm not as easily offended by things. I can let more things go. You can say that's life, it's experience, whatever. Training's played a massive part in that. When you study violence and train for violence and learn it from all these different aspects, the legal, the psychology, the physiology, all that type of stuff. I mean, most men that study war or participate in war don't want war because they know what it actually costs. They want peace. I don't know. You know what I mean? It develops a side of you. So my personal self has a different filter on it as well. But there are also these other filters. And just again, it's so much information happening so quickly with dire consequences, imperfect. I believe all of these filters needed to be developed because you're probably not getting any one filter operating at 100% efficiency. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you need multiple filters that training has built up, these layers, this professional self, where each of it is contributing to it. Because you probably just can't, like, the personal self in and of itself is probably insufficient. Just understanding the legalities of violence is probably in and of itself just inefficient. You know, understanding just the physiology, that part of it is inefficient. Understanding the bad guy blueprints is inefficient. Any one of these things by themselves is inefficient, because the stressors are so intense, so fast, so rapid, so imperfect. There's all this shit hitting you that you need multiple filters, and that's that integrated development of really good training provides all of these different filters, which can operate as one singular unit in a crisis, and that's what allows you to restrain, make good judgment. Okay, the third one I had down there is how judgment separates control from reaction. I think we just kind of already started kind of answering this. Like, how does it separate, or how does it separate control from reaction? And mine is just simple. I had it down because of the analogy I was using is it's the filtering process. The reaction is raw. You have no filter. If you don't like pulp in your orange juice and you just squeeze an orange, you're going to get all kinds of pulp and seeds and everything else. It's just that's what an orange is. There's pulp, there's seeds, there's all this kind of stuff in that. So it's just going to be this raw, unfiltered reaction. And maybe your reaction is appropriate. Maybe your reaction falls in line. Maybe. Depends on the context. But many times I think we can get that a raw, unfiltered reaction is probably going to be easier to pick apart. It's probably going to be easier to find, there's probably going to be consequences. Where if you have, control, it has to have gone, you have control because you've gone through some sort of filtering process.
If it's raw and unfiltered, how do you justify it? Not justify it, but how do you articulate it after the fact? Like why you did what you did. Yeah. It's very hard to do that with a raw, unfiltered reaction.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us are saying that. Like I said, a raw reaction might be okay. Maybe there's a raw reaction of facing imminent egregious bodily harm or death, and you have this raw reaction and it saves your life, and the other guy, you take a life and you preserve your life, and that situation is really kind of contained. It all happened within this, boom, there it is. And maybe, but we all know that the vast majority of situations, most people are just thinking about the struggle, the conflict. They're not thinking about what happened before and what happens after and all of the things that surround it, which are so critically important. They're just, all of their training is for the punching, the kicking, the grappling. Like, it's just all for the physical. And that is such a limited perception of violence. Like, it's not even close to the whole picture. And if that's all you're training for, there's going to be a lot of problems with that, right? So, okay, and the fourth thing off this one is why serious men measure strength by the ability to choose the appropriate response. If you guys want to jump on it, go ahead. If not, I can start. It's up to you. I'll start. Okay, so I actually think that a lot of men, I think that they actually admire strength. I think they admire ability. Like, I think that is visceral. Like, you just can, Connor McDavid, you can watch him play, and whether you like him or the Oilers or whatever it is, you just got to admire the ability and speed and all this different type of stuff. But I think also, like, if you go a little deeper, I know for me, but I think a lot of men admire, the intent and capability. Like, I think what's great about watching somebody, whether it's in a sport or watching somebody in a business pressure situation or just anything where people really can excel, watching somebody do something with pure intent, where it's like they mean it. They're in control of it. The conviction of action, the intent behind it, the purpose behind it, the regulation. So I think that, like, men that are serious about anything, the reason you're serious is because you've done some depth of study. And when you can see people that are operating at higher levels you just see control, you see restraint, you see intent and capability. We've talked like the personal self. That's not what, like, you might go, I see somebody doing that to my kid. You want to see some intent? I intend to end that guy. That's not our definition of intent. Intent and control and conviction of action. So for me, I think men that are serious about anything, they recognize, to whatever level, they recognize how much work it takes to really have intent, to have restraint, to have, conviction of action, purposeful, all that stuff. And I mean, I don't know. I think men that are serious about stuff admire that part of it, because we all want that for ourselves, is to just to be so decisive and purposeful and precise in our actions, our words, our thoughts, our statements, all that stuff. It's not easy to obtain that if you ever really fully can ever attain it. I don't think anyone ever fully gets it. I think you have moments where you really embody it, and then some moments maybe slightly less so, because we're human. But yeah, I think that's just the ability to choose the right course of action when facing dire consequences. It's just, I understand how much work that takes. And I understand the weight of the responsibility that you must carry to be a protector for your family and for yourself. And it's like, yeah, so I don't know. For me, that's what it is. It's the respect for the process.
Well, even like we've talked in previously, is the stakes when it comes to violence are the absolute highest. So if you're able to perform at a high level, make strong tactical decisions when under that amount of pressure,
Yeah.
Like that's the impetus of what we're striving for. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's no easy feat.
Yeah.
That does not happen by accident.
Yeah.
And there's just so much that goes into that process and that journey to be able to handle that type of violence and pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. Dustin, anything on it?
I mean, just like at the end of the day, we're emotional creatures, right? Like there's no denying that. So I think restraint, like you just said, like restraint is not a natural thing. It's not a natural skill set. It's not innate. It is something that takes a lot of work. You know what I mean? Physical, mental, all of it. Like it's a lot of work. And I think,
Yeah.
and that's maybe why there's so much respect for it, because when you
Yeah.
understand that, then you can just see how much work it really takes for people to achieve a high level of anything, sport, business, like you said. It doesn't matter. It's like
Yeah.
there's so much restraint in anybody who is operating at the highest levels, and how many times they can't make the emotional decision. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
again, I talked about, Navy SEALs or tactical teams earlier, and look at militaries. I mean, how many atrocities are occurring all over the world all the time, and like you don't just drop nuclear bombs on them. Why? Like, well, because there's a lot of fallout that comes with that, clearly, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with violence. It's like you can't always just go to the extreme just because it fits within your moral code or your values or your ego or whatever it might be. It's like at the end of the day, you still have to answer to all these other things. The most obvious one being legal, but even on like the moral side of it, you're going to judge yourself morally, whether you acted within your own morals. Your family is going to judge you based on their morals.
Yeah.
Society will judge you based on their morals, like all of that, right? So it's and it's values too. I think in the same way. What does your wife value? What do your kids value? What do your friends value? If that doesn't align with your values and you're acting only within your values, like there's going to be repercussions to that. So
Yeah.
I think you have to understand all of that and how that all fits in with, the people around you, society, and then the legality of it too. So
Yeah. Yeah. I just, again, you see somebody exhibit the power of restraint in these situations. Can you even imagine what the flip side of that is then, for somebody that has the strength for restraint? What happens when restraint's no longer required and that person switches it?
Yeah.
Because it's like,
well,
again, a
that's
lot of people see it as a dirty word, like restraint, like, oh, you're weak, you're soft. And it's like the strength it takes, like, it,
well, that's the thing. You said it earlier tonight, Greg. You talked about fuel.
Yeah.
Like all of that energy and focus and everything, all that, the emotion and all the feelings, and that's all fuel.
Yeah.
And when that all of a sudden gets channeled into something that no longer requires restraint,
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
look out.
Yeah. Yeah. Watching a man be
That's laser
restrained.
focused. Like,
Yeah.
that's a
Watching a
lot of
man.
pressure
Yeah.
on a very, very small point.
Watching a man be restrained in the face of what is perceived to be a violent threat or a physical threat or whatever it is, which obviously has not reached the level of imminent grievous bodily harm or death. Otherwise, there would not be restraint. But watching a man, the strength of restraint is like, I don't even know what the comparison would be to what, but you know, you can watch human beings do amazing things. Some guy on a BMX bicycle running off the side of a mountain and do like, you're just like, how do people do this stuff? Like, it's crazy. It's on that level of watching the excellence of human performance at the highest level possible. And that's just the power of restraint when required. And like we just talked about, if it's no longer required, watch what happens on that side of it, because that's a different human being, right? And that's why we admire that. That's why, we're talking about restraint under pressure.
If you've listened this far, take a moment before moving on, not to agree with anything that I've said, but to notice what stayed with you. These conversations aren't meant to provide answers that you can memorize. They're meant to sharpen your judgment, to clarify your responsibility, and to help you think clearly about moments that don't allow time for thinking. If this episode raised questions, that's the point. If it made you more cautious rather than confident, that's a good thing. And if it didn't resonate with you, you don't need to force it. Preparation is personal, and it has to align with who you are and what you're responsible for. You don't need to do anything after this. Just carry the questions with you and pay attention to how you see the world this week. We'll continue the conversation next time.